Bonjour tout le monde, merci d'être ici. I want to start by thanking Chancellor Schulz for his welcome and congratulate him on a successful summit. The G7 represents not only many of Canada's closest allies, but our closest friends. In the last 3 days, I had the chance to speak with all the leaders of the G7 and many other leaders, including the presidents of Senegal, South Africa, Indonesia, and Argentina, and the Prime Minister of India. Durant le sommet, on a parlé de plusieurs enjeux comme l'importance de défendre la démocratie, l'augmentation du coût de la vie, la sécurité alimentaire, les changements climatiques, les échanges commerciaux et la création de bons emplois pour la classe moyenne. Évidemment, on a aussi discuté de la guerre illégale de la Russie en Ukraine. Whether it's rising food and fuel prices or supply chain issues, the impacts of Russia's illegal invasion are felt in G7 countries and around the world. And the human cost in Ukraine is tragic. During the summit, my G7 colleagues and I had a virtual meeting with President Zelensky, and I also spoke with him on the phone directly. On reste déterminé à soutenir l'Ukraine alors qu'elle défend courageusement sa souveraineté et son intégrité territoriale. Et on appuie la décision du Conseil européen d'accorder le statut de candidat à l'Ukraine et à la Moldavie. Le Canada va continuer de défendre la démocratie et le droit des Ukrainiens à choisir leur propre avenir. To continue supporting Ukraine, Canada will provide a loan of $200 million to the Ukrainian government to help meet its urgent liquidity needs. We'll also invest over $150 million in new humanitarian development and peace and security support. This will include agricultural solutions like grain storage units. In Canada, our farmers typically face big challenges and have been proven to be inventive and creative, so we'll bring this expertise to Ukraine to help as much as we can. Il faut s'attaquer à l'insécurité alimentaire causée par le président Poutine dans le monde, en particulier dans les pays du Sud. Au cours du sommet, on a uni nos efforts pour fournir une aide supplémentaire de 4,5 milliards de dollars américains afin de protéger les personnes les plus vulnérables contre la faim et la malnutrition. Ce montant inclut la somme de 250 millions de dollars canadiens qu'on a annoncé la semaine dernière. On Sunday, for the first time in 3 weeks, Russian missiles hit Kyiv again. And yesterday, a Russian missile hit a shopping mall in Kremenchuk. We condemn these attacks and our hearts go out to the victims and their loved ones. It's important that the world doesn't lose its attention and focus over what's happening in Ukraine. We must and we will remain committed until Ukraine and democracy prevail. Putin and those responsible for these atrocities must be held accountable. Yesterday, Canada imposed new sanctions on over 80 individuals and entities linked to the illegal invasion. And in coordination with the US, the UK, and Japan, will impose a ban on the import of certain gold goods from Russia. This will further isolate them from the international financial system. We know that Putin continues to use lies to justify his invasion. Together, we need to counter the Kremlin's disinformation. That's why Canada will soon introduce sanctions against state-sponsored disinformation and propaganda agents and entities controlled by senior Russian officials. En plus de la guerre de la Russie en Ukraine, notre monde est confronté à plusieurs défis. Au cours du sommet, on a pris des mesures importantes pour accélérer les progrès dans la lutte contre les changements climatiques. Le Canada va continuer d'être un leader dans les efforts pour assurer la qualité de l'air, pour créer de bons emplois et pour bâtir un avenir plus résilient. The G7 recognizes the need to do more to support developing countries in their efforts to transition to clean economies, narrow their infrastructure gap, and create jobs and prosperity. Together, we discussed the importance of mobilizing all possible resources to these ends, picking up on the work Prime Minister Motley of Barbados and I are doing as co-chairs of the Sustainable Development Goals Advocates Group. We're united and we're resolved. Our work together continues to make life more affordable for people, to grow the middle class, to fight climate change and build resilient economies and to create opportunities for businesses and entrepreneurs. I want to thank Chancellor Scholz once again for hosting the summit here in Germany, and I look forward to welcoming him to Canada this coming August. Merci beaucoup tout le monde.
Merci beaucoup, Monsieur le Premier ministre. On va passer maintenant à la période de questions. We'll now start with questions. Christian Noël.
Bonjour, Monsieur le Premier ministre, Christian Noël de Radio-Canada. Pour vous, à quoi ça ressemble une victoire en Ukraine? L'Italie, l'Allemagne, la France pensent que, et maintenant peut-être même les États-Unis, pensent que Volodymyr Zelensky devrait céder ou pourrait avoir à céder une partie de son territoire de façon irrémédiable. Êtes-vous d'accord?
Les seules personnes qui peuvent décider de quoi a l'air une victoire pour l'Ukraine, c'est les Ukrainiens. C'est le président Zelensky lui-même et le gouvernement ukrainien. Le Canada a toujours dit qu'on ne peut pas décider pour les Ukrainiens qu'est-ce qui va se passer pour eux. Il faut les aider, il faut être présent pour amener à une fin cette invasion injuste et illégale de la Russie. Mais il faut mettre les Ukrainiens et garder les Ukrainiens au centre de toutes les décisions sur leur avenir.
En anglais.
The only people who can decide what victory looks like for Ukrainians in Ukraine is Ukrainians themselves. We have always said that President Zelensky and the Ukrainian government need to be at the center of any discussion or decisions about the path forward, and that's what Canada has always done.
Donc, quand M. Zelensky, lui, impose une fin de non-recevoir et il dit qu'il faut repousser l'envahisseur russe, vous soutenez ça? Que la Russie doit complètement sortir de l'Ukraine, vous acceptez et vous soutenez M. Zelensky là-dedans, en anglais et en français.
Les Ukrainiens sont en train de se battre non seulement pour leur souveraineté, pour l'intégrité territoriale, mais aussi pour les principes qui sont au cœur de nos démocraties. Le respect des lois, des règles de droit, la Charte des Nations Unies, les principes de liberté et de choix démocratique pour un peuple. C'est des choses qui sont importantes en Ukraine, mais c'est aussi des choses qui sont fondamentales pour nous tous. Et donc, nous allons continuer d'appuyer le président Zelensky et les Ukrainiens avec de l'aide humanitaire, avec de l'aide au développement, avec de l'aide financière pour pouvoir continuer à être un gouvernement, avec de l'aide militaire pour que si le moment vient que le président Zelensky décide qu'il faut entamer des négociations, ils vont pouvoir le faire d'une position de force. Parce que c'est comme ça qu'on s'assure que Vladimir Poutine ne gagne pas en Ukraine.
Next question.
Oh, en anglais, excuse.
Oh, pardon.
It is very, very clear that Ukrainians are fighting not only for their sovereignty, for their territorial integrity, but for the values and principles that underpin all of our democracies. The rule of law, respect for human rights, the UN Charter, these principles that matter to all of us. If and when President Zelensky and the Ukrainians decide it's time to negotiate or move forward to resolving, to ensure that Russia faces defeat in Ukraine, they need to be able to negotiate from a position of force, and that's why a position of strength, and that's why we are continuing to be there with humanitarian assistance, with significant financial assistance, including what we announced today, so that the government can continue to function, and also significant military assistance so that they can continue to hold strong against this illegal Russian invasion.
Hi, Prime Minister. Brian Platt from Bloomberg News. Can you tell us what kind of conversations you had with Chancellor Scholz about energy cooperation between your country, and do you want to see an LNG deal between Canada and Germany? Do you think that's achievable?
There is no question that Russia's invasion of Ukraine has changed a whole lot of things. On the one hand, It has made it all the more important to get off the world's, and particularly Europe's, reliance on Russian oil and gas. But it's also made it much more urgent and much more led to many more actions so that we accelerate that transition off of our reliance on oil and gas altogether as a world. In the short term, in the immediate, there are real pressures on Europe and on the world that is reliant on Russian energy sources, and we will be there in the short term with whatever support we can. And the conversations around LNG are centered around the fact that LNG infrastructure is the same type of infrastructure that is going to be needed as we transition towards hydrogen. There are many conversations going on with Chancellor Schultz, and I look forward to continue them when he comes to Canada and Ottawa in August. But we are certainly going to continue these conversations about how we can be helpful in the short term, but how we can ensure transition to cleaner energy in the medium and long term.
Could you also tell us what conversations you've had here on when it comes to inflation and gas prices and the affordability issue? And can we expect any more measures from your government this summer?
Obviously, we know how much Canadians and people around the world are struggling with high gas prices, high food prices, all consequences of the illegal war in Ukraine that Russia launched. And it was at the center of all of our conversations here. Canada is deeply connected to the rest of the global economy, and therefore things that are happening around the world do have an impact in Canada, like inflation, like fuel prices, like food prices. We have taken significant agreements on moving forward, for example, on looking at how to put a price cap on Russian oil, not just to deprive Putin of the revenue he's using to continue to wage an illegal war in Ukraine, but to put downward pressure on fuel prices around the world by putting a cap on Russian oil and gas. These are things that we have a lot of work to do on over the coming weeks and months together as a G7 and as a world, but we are committed to being there to support our citizens as they face these great challenges.
Prochaine question.
Prime Minister Murray Brewster with CBC News. What NATO Secretary General announced yesterday is profound. It has profound impacts on Canada's deployed overseas operations. It has a profound impact on Canada's defence policy. Does your government intend to increase the size of the Canadian deployment in Latvia to a brigade level? And does Canada intend to put more troops on high readiness alert?
We have been working closely with NATO partners, with the Secretary General of NATO, and especially with the Latvians, where Canada leads the enhanced forward presence and is committed to making sure we continue to stand up against Russian threats and Russian posturing, and quite frankly, Russian actions in Eastern Europe. We, like others, are developing plans to be able to scale up rapidly, and those are conversations that I very much look forward to having over the next couple of days in NATO, in Spain. Ça fait plusieurs semaines qu'on est en discussion avec nos partenaires de l'OTAN et avec le secrétaire général de l'OTAN, mais surtout avec nos partenaires en Lettonie, où le Canada mène la présence de l'OTAN pour tenir le flanc est de l'OTAN. Nous savons que la situation a changé avec l'invasion de l'Ukraine, et donc nous sommes en train d'élaborer des plans, comme les autres pays, pour pouvoir en faire plus, mais c'est des conversations qui vont se tenir pendant les 2 prochaines journées de travail à Madrid pour l'OTAN.
NATO intends to have up to 300,000 troops on high readiness. What do you think Russia's reaction is going to be? Do you think they're going to see this as a provocation, and do you think this has the potential of deepening the crisis?
As you know, Canada has continued to step up within NATO, being there for not just the enhanced forward presence in Latvia, but present in Romania, present with more ships in the Baltics, and continuing to be part of the demonstration that we take very seriously the provocation by Russia that was an illegal invasion of Ukraine. Now, we've already seen the consequences of that invasion of Ukraine around NATO, with Sweden and Finland reversing decades of policy and deciding that they need to join NATO. The response that we are taking to Russia's illegal actions is measured and proportional, and we are not looking at being provocative. We are looking at ensuring that Russia knows we will be there to defend democracies and the values that underpin them as necessary.
Next question.
Hi, Prime Minister. David Cochran with CBC. I'm wondering if you can give us a little bit more clarity on the scaling up plans for NATO. You mentioned Latvia. Are we talking about scaling up on the front lines in Latvia, or in the reserve force, or a combination of both? Can you be a little bit more specific?
As you know, David, we are on our way to NATO, to Madrid tonight for NATO meetings tomorrow. And there will be discussions about all this, and we will have more to say as those discussions unfold.
Okay, on another topic, on the first day of the summit, Boris Johnson spoke about the fatigue amongst politicians and amongst people as the war goes on, and Joe Biden has talked a bit about that, the fatigue being caused by the geopolitical fallout of Ukraine. You've all talked about stressing unity and staying together. It seems, I don't want to say it's easy to do at the leader level, but it's easier to do with a group of like-minded leaders. How do you now go back to your countries and convince your populations who are struggling from the affordability crisis to stick with you on this?
Well, first of all, every country has different challenges on that, but the level of unity that Canadians feel in support for Ukraine and standing with Ukraine. We are the country after Russia that has the largest Ukrainian diaspora in the world. And Canadians are always there, even if we didn't have that personal and familial connection to Ukraine. We're there to stand up for what is right in the world. And Canadians are unequivocal in their condemnation of Russia and their support for Ukraine. Yes, Russia's illegal war has caused hardships, obviously first and foremost in Ukraine, but in countries around the world. Countries like Canada that are seeing rising fuel prices, rising food prices, inflationary pressures, supply chain disruptions. But Canadians continue to stand with Ukraine. And the conversations we've had with partners around the world, whether it was at the Commonwealth Heads of Government just a few days ago or with global partners here at the G7, these pressures are being felt around the world, but everywhere we see resolve to stand up for the principles of territorial integrity, sovereignty, and needing to put an end to this illegal invasion. Okay. Nous savons que oui, il y a des conséquences directes sur les citoyens, y compris au Canada, avec l'augmentation des prix du pétrole, de la nourriture, des problèmes avec les chaînes d'approvisionnement. En même temps, le Canada et les Canadiens sont sans équivoque pour se tenir debout avec l'Ukraine, pas seulement parce que c'est des amis, c'est des gens qui ont des liens profonds avec le Canada. On est le pays avec la plus grande diaspora ukrainienne au monde, après la Russie. Et nous allons continuer d'être là, non seulement à cause de ces liens, mais à cause de notre conviction qu'il faut toujours être là pour ce qui est juste et bon. Et les Ukrainiens font face à une invasion illégale contre laquelle toutes les démocraties doivent se tenir debout. En même temps, nous allons continuer d'assurer et d'engager nos partenaires à l'international, comme on l'a fait au Commonwealth, comme on l'a fait avec les partenaires qui sont venus nous voir hier, qu'on se doit de se tenir pour l'intégrité territoriale et les principes essentiels pour tous les pays à travers le monde que la Russie a choisi de violer.
Next question.
Good afternoon, Prime Minister. Kevin Gallagher, CTV National News. I want to ask you about your meeting yesterday with Indian Prime Minister Narendra Modi. Now, India has started to buy, of course, more Russian oil. We know 50 times more from April until now. Even though it's at a discount, it's still helping fund Russia's war. What was your message to Prime Minister Modi?
Obviously, there are ranges of perspectives around the world on the path forward, on the condemnation of Russia for this illegal invasion. At the Commonwealth, Canada and India were deeply engaged in figuring out the common ground that allowed us to have a statement as we move forward. So I'm very aware that Canada's position on Ukraine and Russia is not the same position that India has. But it's really important that we continue to engage substantively, not just in conversations around the rule of law and the principles of international rights and justice, but also on how we can ensure solutions for our citizens, how we can move forward on trade, how we can move forward on strengthening our democracies, how we can move forward on ensuring that our citizens are benefiting from the opportunities that the future needs to give them as we fight climate change. So it was a broad-ranging conversation. I continue to impress upon him that we need to recognize that the instability in the world right now was directly caused by Russia's unprovoked attack on Ukraine. And we're going to continue to have those conversations in a frank and direct way because that's what the world needs.
Back in March, of course, Canada pretty much cleared out its inventory of weapons that were donated to Ukraine. We're still waiting to find out when that inventory will be replenished. When will your government replenish and perhaps advance Canada's weaponry?
We have been working as soon as we started sending essential weaponry to Ukraine, not just so Ukrainians could defend themselves and their territory, but they could continue to stand up in a fight that matters to Canada and to Canadians of protecting democracy and principles of the rule of law and the UN Charter that really matter. We immediately started the process of procuring replacements for that military equipment. We will continue to ensure that we are providing all the necessary support and tools for the women and men of the Canadian Forces to be able to do their jobs wherever they are needed. But we concluded that at this particular moment, it is essential for Ukrainians to have all the tools they have, and we are ensuring we're replacing those as quickly as possible for the Canadian Forces.
We'll take one last question.
David Aiken from Global News. I just got one and a follow-up here. In our television program, The West Block, your Chief of Defense Staff, General Eyre, was asked about the source of the nearly $5 billion your government has promised for NORAD modernization. Here's what he said, and I'm going to quote, "I haven't completely figured out myself the source of funds for this." Why would he say that? Why would your top general say something like that?
The reality is we made significant commitments in our last budget around defense investments, around NORAD modernization, conversations that I continued when I actually went down to NORAD a number of weeks ago to talk about how Canada and the United States work together to protect our territory and, quite frankly, to hold NATO's western and northern flank. These are extremely important investments that we've made. They are fully sourced. We will continue to make sure that we are stepping up to support not just the women and men of the Canadian Forces, but what our allies and partners expect of us around NORAD, around NATO, with the right equipment.
Now, NATO released its defense expenditure comparison for each country a couple of days ago. I want to use the one metric, constant dollars, spending by Canada in constant dollars. And when you do that, your government spent 3% less in 2021 versus 2020. And over the 5-year period that ends next year, your government will spend an average of 1% a year less on defense. Why can't you spend more on defense? Why can't we be taken seriously as a country when it comes to defense spending?
Canadians expect our government to continue to step up on the world stage in being there on the missions and in the theaters where we are expected and we are needed. And Canada is always part of NATO missions and continues to step up significantly. Canadians expect us to do that in a responsible and reflective way. And that's what we have always done. We announced significant investments in NORAD modernization, in new equipment, including fighter jets for the Canadian military, because we know how important it is to step up, and we will continue to do so to make sure that the world knows that it can count on Canada to be part of advancing the cause of democracy, the rule of law, and opportunities for everyone.
Hi, Prime Minister. Laura Osman, the Canadian Press. The communique has been released, and one of the key messages in here appears to be about transitioning away from Russian oil in particular. And we heard the Italian leader this morning, who you spoke to, talk about the importance of Canada's role in that conversation. So I'm wondering what messages you were able to give to the leader in terms of specific ways that Canada may be able to help other nations transition away from Russian oil and coal.
Canada, obviously, as an oil and gas producer, is ensuring that in the short term we're doing what we can to alleviate pressures. We're also looking in the medium term at expanding some infrastructure, but in a way that hits that medium-term and long-term goal of accelerating transition not just off Russian oil and gas, but off of our global dependence on fossil fuels because of the impacts of climate change. So Canada will be there to respond in a immediate way as best we can to help our European partners and partners around the world, but we will also be there to ensure that that energy transformation needs to happen as quickly as possible. And on that, Canada has long been a leader and will continue to step up, whether it's on hydrogen, whether it's on hydroelectricity projects around the world, whether it's on clean energy investments through the significant financing that we're giving for fighting climate change. There are many things Canadians are doing and will continue to do to transform the world in the right direction.
Thank you. This is what concludes Canada's press conference. C'est ce qui conclut la conférence de presse du Canada.
Merci beaucoup tout le monde.